He once wandered along the quiet bends of an English country river, listening carefully to the hidden rhythm of the seasons. While the modern world rushed forward with noise and industry, Robert Ward chose a slower path. He carried a weathered notebook beneath his arm, a few glass specimen jars in his coat pocket, and spent his days beside the water, watching life unfold in silence. To most people, the river was ordinary. To him, it was a living library filled with secrets waiting patiently to be understood. Tonight, as the fire crackles softly in the distance, let us step into that forgotten riverside world with him. Let the sound of slow-moving water and rustling reeds guide your thoughts away from the noise of the day. And as the night deepens, allow his quiet journey to carry you gently into rest. Robert Ward was not interested in fame or grand discoveries. He did not dream of crossing oceans or conquering mountains. What fascinated him instead were the smallest details most people walked past without noticing. The movement of a dragonfly above the water. The trembling reflection of clouds in the river current. The soft bloom of water lilies opening at dawn. When he first arrived at the narrow countryside stream that would shape the rest of his life, England was changing quickly. Factories rose in distant cities. Steam engines thundered across the land. Villages that had once been peaceful became crowded with smoke and machinery. Yet the river remained untouched, flowing quietly through meadows and ancient willow trees as if time itself had slowed there. Every morning before sunrise, Robert would walk down the muddy path toward the water. Mist hovered low across the surface, and the cold air smelled faintly of wet earth and moss. He often stood silently for several minutes before opening his notebook, simply listening. Birds called softly in the reeds. Fish disturbed the surface with gentle ripples. Somewhere far away, church bells echoed across the hills. He believed nature revealed itself only to those willing to be patient. Unlike many scientists of his era, Robert did not approach the natural world as something to dominate or control. He saw himself as a guest there. A quiet observer. He carefully sketched river plants with ink pens, recording the curve of every leaf and the pattern of every feather. Sometimes he spent entire afternoons sitting perfectly still beside the bank just to observe the behavior of insects dancing above the water. The villagers often thought he was strange. They would see him kneeling in the mud for hours, completely absorbed by creatures no larger than a fingernail. But Robert never seemed bothered by their judgment. In truth, the river had already become his true companion. As seasons passed, his journals grew thicker. Their pages became filled not only with scientific notes, but also reflections about solitude, memory, and the passing of time. During autumn evenings, he wrote about leaves drifting along the current like forgotten thoughts. During winter mornings, he described the silence of frozen riverbanks as something almost sacred. There was a calmness in his writing that made readers feel as though they, too, were sitting beside him under gray English skies. Years slowly slipped by. Friends moved away or passed on. The world outside the countryside became louder and faster. Yet Robert remained beside the same river, following its changes with unwavering devotion. He noticed how certain flowers bloomed earlier after warmer winters. He recognized individual birds by their songs. He could even tell the weather by the way the water moved against the stones. The river became a mirror for his own life. In middle age, he began to understand that what he truly loved was not simply nature itself, but the feeling of stability it offered. Human life often felt uncertain and fragile. Cities changed. Relationships faded. Entire generations disappeared. But the river continued flowing with quiet dignity, asking for nothing, expecting nothing. That realization brought him peace. On rainy evenings, Robert would return to his small cottage carrying damp notebooks beneath his coat. He would sit beside the fireplace, warming his hands while carefully rewriting his observations by candlelight. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, the room smelled of paper, smoke, and river water. Those moments became the center of his life. He once wrote that modern people were not exhausted because they lacked comfort, but because they had forgotten how to be still. The river had taught him that silence was not emptiness. Silence was space. Space to notice. Space to breathe. Space to remember what truly mattered. Even in old age, when his hands trembled slightly and his eyesight began to fade, Robert continued visiting the riverbank. He moved more slowly now, leaning on a walking stick as he followed familiar paths through the tall grass. Yet his sense of wonder never disappeared. Sometimes he simply sat on an old wooden bench for hours, listening to the water move beneath the fading light of evening. He no longer felt the need to explain or categorize everything he saw. Observation itself had become enough. The young naturalists who occasionally visited him expected lectures about biology and research. Instead, Robert often spoke softly about patience. About learning to sit quietly with the world rather than constantly trying to change it. He believed nature healed people not through dramatic revelations, but through gentle repetition. Flowing water. Moving clouds. Returning birds. Small things repeated over time could calm even the most restless mind. By the final years of his life, his shelves overflowed with journals swollen from years of damp river air. Thousands of pages documented tiny moments most people would never notice. Yet together, those moments formed something beautiful. A portrait of a man who had chosen observation over ambition, stillness over noise, and wonder over distraction. And perhaps that is why his story still feels comforting today. Because deep down, many of us long for what Robert Ward found beside that quiet English river. A place untouched by hurry. A slower rhythm. A life measured not by achievement, but by attention. Tonight, as the fire burns low and darkness settles softly around you, imagine that old riverside once more. The cool air drifting across the reeds. The steady murmur of flowing water. The distant call of birds fading into the evening sky. Let the worries of the day sink gently beneath the surface like smooth stones falling into deep water. And as sleep slowly approaches, may you, like Robert Ward, discover a quiet place within yourself where everything finally grows still.